Welcome, everybody, to the Soul of the Unexplained. I am your host, Jim Kelgard, and a very happy Independence Day to all of my fellow Americans out there. We've got the 4th of July is coming up in less than, probably about 4 or 5 hours, depending on where in the country you are, as this is Wednesday night, July 3rd, that we're recording this. And once again, folks, regrettably, I am without my friend and co host of the Soul of the Unexplained, Mr. Roger Stokes. Roger still isn't feeling well, and so joining me today, I've got two guests to help make up for it, two wonderful guest co-hosts here. And we're going to start with a face that should be familiar to many of you, including those of you that are longtime viewers of Jeff Freeman's J Free 906 podcast. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Seth Bridges to the Soul of the Unexplained. Seth, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, Jim. Thanks. How are
Yeah,
you
yeah.
doing?
You know what? I'm just hoping that I don't get hit with too much of a barrage of neighbors setting off fireworks because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
likely to sound like a gangland once the sun goes down. Because my neighbors are very patriotic. Let's put it that way. And
Yeah, so I was just gonna say it's a double-edged sword, right? It's awesome to have patriotic neighbors, and then it's on 4th of July, you hope that you don't have small dogs or pets
right,
that are terrified of fireworks like mine.
right, absolutely, definitely a very real concern.
But yeah,
And
sorry to cut you off there.
no worries at all, man. None whatsoever. And again, welcoming back to the Soul of the Unexplained, Mr. John Neiberger, my favorite Denver Broncos fan, among other things. John, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for inviting me on. And we're all hoping Roger will get well soon and be back here. And he does this way better than the rest of us, I think. But I appreciate you inviting me back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me, both of you. So let's go ahead and dive right into this episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. And tonight we're going to be talking about, of course, season 5, episode number 10, which is called "What the Gel," right? So all kinds of really cool and interesting, fascinating, and in many ways mind-blowing things unfolded in this particular episode. And before we get started, I just want to ask both of you. We'll start with you, Seth. What were kind of your overall thoughts when you watched this particular episode? Just some of the things that stood out to you that you were impressed or maybe even unimpressed with.
Uh, well, right off the bat, for me, I love experiencer stories. I love the history. So the former sheriff coming out and telling his experiences with the landowner. I'm horrible at name recall, so I'll let you do that. But yeah, when
Kris
they were
Porritt.
telling,
Yep.
yeah, thank you. When he was telling the stories and saying, I promise we made a pact not to talk about it, but now we're cool with the family. The family's gave him the okay to talk about this. I blew my mind. Uh, it, like Thomas said, I shared his total sentiment of like, man, if you'd have told me this stuff, I'd have laughed. But now it's hard to discount. So right off the bat, what he disclosed, and then of course the connection with the gel. It was weird, and then equal parts frustrated and not surprised with the lack of progress in the Mesa drilling program.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. John, how about you? What were your kind of quick overall thoughts?
Yeah, I would say my overall general feeling was, after some of the episodes we've had, like the cone zone, lasers stopping in midair, all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. Compared to that, this episode seemed a little, I won't say lackluster, but not quite as, you know, uh crazy as some of those others. But it did a great job of just advancing the weirdness. It
mm,
really, it's just it was lots of little things that are all just kind of weird, and it just keeps
yeah,
piling up and piling up and piling up. And you could also you could have titled this, an exercise in frustration, because most of this episode was just things not working. Instead of
yeah,
sometimes things work, in this case, nothing was working. And um, but I think that's just how the ranch is, the and we'll get into more of it when we start talking about the individual points in the show. But yeah, it seemed like at every opportunity in this episode, things just weren't working. The guys were getting frustrated. But the reasons why things aren't working, I think, is going to be ultimately the most entertaining.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those episodes that increased the weirdness quotient, I guess you would say. Really, really, again, kind of stuff that I wouldn't say came out of left field, but just again, something else that I wasn't anticipating as far as the story that Kris Porritt related to all of us. I mean, I was just completely, fixated on every word that he was saying when he was talking about that
Mm-hmm.
experience, and we're definitely going to go into detail on that right now as we dive into episode number 10. What the gel? So on come the four eyes, and here we go, folks, deeper into the rabbit hole, as they say. So the episode begins with Thomas and Caleb meeting up with Eric and Travis out at the Mesa drilling site to update them on the calf situation from the previous episode. And Caleb says, quote, "So the vet looked at the calf's eyes and you could see around the base of them where it was hemorrhaging from the inside," close quote. Thomas then chimes in saying, "She said that there's swelling on the brain and it's a lot of pressure on the eyes, but yeah, it's bleeding around the eyes." Travis then talks about the difficulties experienced thus far with drilling two boreholes into the mesa on either side of the anomaly, how the drilling continues to get interrupted, and of course, how there seems to be a possible correlation to the recent drilling issues and the incident with the calf being hit by what can only be assumed as something on the order of microwaves or possibly even gamma rays. Travis mentions that one of the symptoms of microwave or gamma ray radiation exposure is brain swelling and bleeding from your eyes from hemorrhaging behind the eyeball. Ugh, I don't even like the thought or the sound of that. So he's further frustrated. This is Travis, of course, that because while the incident with the calf was unfolding, none of the team's detection equipment went off. So that would mean like their dosimeters, their RF meters, tri-field meters, what have you. There was nothing that was being indicated on their equipment that there was some kind of a spike of whatever kind of radiation this was that hit the calf. Dragon expresses concern by saying, quote, "If there's truly something that can have an effect that quickly on an animal like that, that's got to make you pause. Look, we're drilling into the mesa. We're breaking ground we never have before. I mean, I hate to say it, but is it some kind of a warning shot?" Close quote. Travis then responds by saying, "The only for sure we can say is it absolutely correlates with the drilling, and it's right here at the drill site." Thomas then says, "We're often told that when you dig on the ranch, bad things happen. Now I have to wonder, after seeing this calf, if the two are related. We don't know what we're dealing with inside that mesa. Look, I've had a lot of health issues related to this ranch, so this definitely got me on high alert." Thomas tells us that the rancher took the calf off the Skinwalker Ranch property, and while the calf is permanently blind, the rancher decided that it would not be euthanized, so the calf, we're happy to report, is still alive. So let's stop right there, John and Seth, and let's talk a little bit about wrapping up that whole bit with the calf that kind of crossed over into this episode regarding the injury and directed energy. So, Seth, we'll start with you. What's your take on this? Do you think that this might be an instance of what we hear about these directed energy weapons of some kind? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that was my first thought when they said, our instruments weren't picking anything up. I thought of how, Travis one time got blasted, and maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but I feel like he got hit. People right next to him did not.
Correct.
So I feel like this isn't the first time that it seems to suggest that there are something, I'll say, is directing concentrated beams of energy Forgive me, scientific folk. That's my layman explanation of it. Yeah. So right away, I thought directed beam. And then, just with the drilling, they're struggling on both sides. It makes me think, is this thing moving around? Um, yeah. And of course, I'm super happy to hear that the calf was able to live, because watching when it was going through that distress, seeing its eyes, I wasn't sure that it was going to live, especially knowing, I watch History Channel's other programs where they, kill alligators on swamp stuff. So I know they're not shy of showing animals that do end up dying. So I was very relieved that it lived, even blind. Life is life. So I'll celebrate that. Yeah, and cattle mutilation. And I thought that was going to be the end of it. And of course, it leads into, the history of cattle mutilations that have happened and still continue. All sorts of weird stuff. And dragons, first thought of, is this a warning? I'm so naive. I didn't even think that. I just thought, oh, that's so weird. But of course it's a warning. As soon as he said it, my blood kind of, ooh, he's right. That was a warning. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, John. So same question to you. Does it appear that it's that? And then a question on top of that: if it is in fact some kind of directed energy weapon, what would be the implications? Let's say, is it something from our own government, heaven forbid, that they're running as some kind of twisted experiment with this technology? Or is it, pure technology or some foreign adversary? Or could it be, one of these quote unquote other classifications that could mean anything from interdimensional to ET to what have you? So, John, what say you?
Yeah, that great points and great questions. But I don't know. It feels like a directed energy weapon, but we don't really know about the weapon part of that term. All we know is it really looks like directed energy. You know, maybe the calf was just unlucky enough to be in the path of something that was going on, right? We don't know for sure. But, like when you bring in other people getting hit, Travis, exactly the example of Travis getting hit with the gamma rays, with people right next to him that don't get anything. That's pretty weird. And it feels intentional. And I don't know how you'd prove it one way or the other. You'd almost have to have a field of detectors across the entire ranch at all times, looking to see if maybe this is something that happens a lot. And most of the time, these beams just hit dirt, so no one notices. I don't know how you would know that. But yeah, it feels intentional, which makes me a little more than a little concerned for the safety of the people and the animals out at the ranch. Yeah, and then with the drilling, I'm kind of dumbfounded because these are professional drillers that are used to drilling into all sorts of different materials. And driller after driller has problems out there. I don't really get it. It doesn't make any sense, with the transmitters, the location beacon disappearing, from detection, all that kind of stuff. It's like either you lose the locations and you can't. It's frustration. Something it's different each time though. One time it's, oh, we don't know where our drill bit is because the locator beacon has failed, or it's not failed, but we can't detect it. Another time it's, oh, we're hitting something so hard we can't punch through it. What in the hell is inside a sandstone or limestone? So there's nothing in that mesa that should be so hard that these drillers can't get through it. These guys drill through anything. And it's not like someone's got, 2-inch steel plates dropped inside the mesa. Probably. Maybe there is, and we don't know it.
So
But
somebody made a kind of half jokingly said to me the other day, he's like, you know, Brandon Fugel is clearly a fan of Marvel Comics because he named that shell corporation that Skinwalker Ranch was owned, he named it Adamantium, right? Well, anybody that's a fan of Marvel Comics, particularly the character Wolverine, which I am a huge fan of not only Marvel Comics but the character Wolverine. And Wolverine, of course, has this super strong metal alloy known as adamantium that is, virtually indestructible, kind of like the stuff that Captain America's vibranium shield is crafted out of. So somebody said, well, maybe maybe adamantium is like a real thing, and maybe that's what's inside protecting this thing. And of course, it was meant as a joke. Obviously,
Mhm.
I'm not saying that's what it is, but you're mentioning just how hard this substance is. What do we have to compare it against? It's because these drill bits have had some of the strongest, toughest drill bits, and nothing seems to be able to penetrate it. And at one point, now we know that the piece of equipment that the drilling company has up there can exert up to 60,000 pounds of pressure. And I think it
Mhm.
was an episode or two ago where they said that at that point they were exerting 40,000 pounds of pressure, so 20 tons worth of pressure. So yeah, whatever it is, there's and we go back to the previous seasons where there was no sign of friction. That drill bit was, should have been
Mhm.
hotter than blazes when they pulled
Right.
it out of some of the boreholes previously,
Forgot about
and
that.
it looked like it was brand new
Mhm.
right off the shelf.
Yeah.
And
So what's stopping that? That's a different frustration. That's
right,
completely different than hitting something so hard you can't punch through.
right,
Like there's a force stopping the drill bit from proceeding, but it's not actually rubbing up against anything.
yeah,
That's bewildering.
it's truly baffling. It really is. And so we also know from talking with Caleb this past week that Caleb was genuinely concerned about this radiation seemingly coming out of nowhere. And like you mentioned, Seth, and you as well, John, we have instances of this happening in the past where Travis was lifting the lid of that cistern back in season one, and he gets blasted with something, but yet Jim Segala, who was just a short ways away from him, nothing at all, right? And so that's why it kind of lends credence to this belief that maybe it is being done intentionally. We don't know. We don't
Mhm.
know how to prove that other than some way of getting repeatable results. But Caleb did mention to us that this is what genuinely scared him, because the truly terrifying thing is if this thing was able to shut down all of their sensors to the extent that their dosimeters weren't even working to let them know that this level of radiation was there, how are they then going to be able to know if they're being hit with stuff like this? And how do you then know if you're not being quite literally slow cooked by this radiation, which is an absolute, major, major health concern? So, so yeah, that's the kind of thing that really, in retrospect, you can see now why Caleb was so concerned when the veterinarian was telling, you know, Caleb and Thomas about, hey, this looks like it caused neurological damage to this calf, and the hemorrhaging in the eyes, that's coming from internally. And so yeah, that's pretty serious stuff,
Yep.
without question. Alrighty, so now we're going to dive into the really interesting stuff, because from there Travis tells us, today the drillers are extracting the rods from the mesa so that we can assess the damage to the the drill bit from possible contact with the dome-shaped object. They're also eager to inspect the beacon in the drill bit. This is the device, again, folks, that sends a signal to a receiver on the surface so that the drillers can keep track of the drill bit underground. But just when the drill bit may have hit the dome-shaped anomaly, the beacon stops working. And Eric says, quote, every time we've tried to drill into the site, we've encountered roadblocks to our investigation. We've run into things including numerous equipment malfunctions, so it's hard for me not to speculate about what relationship that possible dome-shaped object was having with our equipment. Could it be a conductor? Could it be something even more interesting? I guess time will tell what it is we're dealing with at this point. Close quote. Once the drill bit is pulled out, it doesn't appear to have any physical damage. And remember, it's, been pushing up against something that is so hard they seemingly can't punch through it with the drill. So again, it appears to doesn't have any damage to the drill bit. So Alex and the Mark construction guys have Travis test the voltage reading on the beacon's battery. wondering if maybe the battery got drained. Well, with a reading of 3.619 volts, the battery for the drill bit beacon is fully charged. So it wasn't that. Travis gives the battery back to the drilling team and they reinstall the battery for the beacon and prepare it for reinsertion into the borehole. Travis then says, quote, have the drilling beacons actually been shut down by merely making contact with whatever that dome-shaped object is? If so, that makes us all the more determined to get a borehole drilled up through the mesa so we can insert scanning devices and figure out just what we're dealing with in there and how it might be related to all the other strange phenomena that keep happening on the ranch. Close quote. So, real quickly, Seth, what are your thoughts? Do you think that there appears to be some evidence that we're seeing through all this that something may be interfering intentionally? There's that word again of intent, intentionally interfering with not only the beacon on the drill but the drilling rig itself. Your thoughts?
Yeah, again, if this was the first time it was happening or just these guys, I would kind of question it, but it seems to happen every year to where they're lucky that I'm not in charge of what we do at the Mesa. Because I would, at this point, as much as I used to say, no, we can't blow up the Mesa, now I'm like, let's just blow up the Mesa, guys.
Right.
Or even let's just take one big rock at a time. I know those rocks are huge, and it really illustrated that when they had that big crane move just a few to kind of make it easier to get the drill in last year. Nothing seems to help no matter where they go at it. They go at it from the top with that smaller drill, went nowhere. They got these guys, they say, okay, let's go from the side, then we'll do sensors. And I thought, why don't they just try and drill it directly? Because again, I was kind of feeling more destructive this season. So I mean, is it intentional? Of course, I lean towards that. I'm big on the feelings, and it feels that way. It doesn't mean it is, but it's like y'all were saying. Like, is it a force field? Is this thing moving? Like I was kind of thinking, does it not want to be found, or is it just a trickster and just enjoys frustrating the people on the ranch as well as now the millions of viewers that are watching getting frustrated. If it's a trickster energy, I'm sure it's feeding off of our frustration. So that's kind of where I'm at. I would, I don't know the answer. It's just so. What did you say, John? Like baffling, just
Yeah, it's
befuddled.
yeah, that or one of those. One of the
Bewildered. Yeah.
baffling, bewildering, befuddling. They all apply.
Mm-hmm.
And John, how about you? Do you
I'm
think
with Seth.
like Seth says that trickster element? I mean that would certainly certainly seem to make sense. What are your
It is
thoughts?
weird. Again, it's hard not to think that there's something conscious and intentional about the different ways that it thwarts the drilling or anything else. It's like it's not always the same thing. Sometimes it's batteries draining. Yeah, that happens all the time. But with the drilling, it seems to be something different each time. It's throwing them curveballs.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm with Seth. I'm highly against blowing up the Mesa, but I think maybe we're going to need to blow up the Mesa. Right?
Oh
Or
man,
I don't
guys.
know. I don't know what other gear we can get out there. You got to get something big and just, I mean, what, open pit mine? You need something huge, and I don't think you'd be able to get it out there. Yeah,
Mm.
I don't know if you would be able to get the equipment out there you need because you got to move all those boulders, but you got to clear away that material. And that might be the only way to figure out what this is actually just dig down. Instead of drilling, just dig bit by bit until you get to whatever it is. And I don't have the slightest idea how you do that.
Yeah,
No.
it's honestly a maddening process to watch. Imagine what it must be like for the team to have seemingly every attempt foiled that they're trying to, use the most non-invasive techniques that they can, but yet, like Seth was saying, it's like something is moving stuff on them or deliberately just keeping things out of their reach. And it's easy to understand why so many people are getting frustrated that, more progress hasn't been made in that regard as far as the drilling goes. But but yeah, even using something, you know, much more invasive with the drilling, you know, something like blasting or anything like that. There's a whole other host of complications that come along with that, and certainly understand why the team doesn't want to do that for a number of reasons, because they don't own all of the Mesa,
Yeah,
and
their neighbors.
also, yeah, and you also still run the risk of damaging, if not destroying, the very thing that you're trying to find. So there's there's
Absolutely.
there's no easy solution to do it other than to, I guess, just like Travis said, keep trying, even if you have to go at it blindly. And I'm afraid
Mm.
that's probably where they're going to end up going, unless they can get through in one of these, you know, upcoming episodes. Hopefully they'll make some progress. But yeah, that drilling is just, you know, one frustrating headache on top of another. I hats off to the guys for not losing their cool more than they have. I'm sure already.
Yeah.
I think that
So
gets edited out. Those are
yeah,
all Travis's cuss words.
yeah. Like I said, we gotta have an episode that's completely uncensored, not
Oh,
just Travis, but the whole team,
I would pay extra for that.
right?
Yeah.
So the scene then cuts to Homestead One, or the ranch house, with Thomas and Dragon meeting up with Tom Lewis and Candace Lindy and retired Uintah County Sheriff Kris Porritt. Now, viewers may recall that Kris Porritt was featured in season 2 of the docuseries, where he at the time related an incident on the ranch before the Shermans bought the ranch, which obviously was before the Bigelow team bought the ranch, where cows were inexplicably stacked on top of each other inside a small barn on the ranch, and furthermore housed some grass out in the field by OT1, Observation Tower 1, was matted down by what Kris at the time referred to as a spaceship. So Kris begins his conversation with Tom and Candace by saying that he knows of a secret that he promised former Skinwalker Ranch owner Kenneth Myers that he would never reveal. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ken Myers owned Skinwalker Ranch from 1947 to 1992. And Kris, along with Tom, Candace Dragon, and Thomas Winterton, then get in the Jeep and drive to a spot on the ranch away from the Mesa and the Triangle that appears to be along the southeastern boundary of the Skinwalker Ranch property. As they're driving in the Jeep, Kris says, quote, "Last time I came here to the ranch, I didn't get into much detail. There's things on this ranch that's happened that I haven't even told people yet." He goes on to say, "Me and Ken Myers made a promise and a pact that I'd never disclose any of the information, and so I just kept that secret all this time. But my family convinced me to go ahead and open up. That's why I decided to come out here today." Close quote. So Kris then leads them to a spot along the eastern fence line, right underneath a large tree. He tells the group that this area was where one of the Myers cows had been surgically operated on. He says, quote, "One day, Ken Myers called me up and said, 'You need to come up here and look at what I've found.' And when I got up here, there was mutilated or surgically operated on cattle. It was quite a mystery to me and Ken. The cow was laying on this side of the ditch," as he's pointing to the ground, "and the head was kind of down into the ditch just a little bit." He then says, from the shoulder blades forward to the tip of the nose, every bone was gone. There wasn't a neck bone, there wasn't a skull, there wasn't nothing. It was just an empty sack and an empty head." Close quote. He then says, "Now you tell me, without using a scalpel or something, how are you going to remove that? There was no blood, nothing." Close quote. Now, folks, remember there's a long history of cattle mutilations on the ranch, with reports that go back decades, long before the current era, long before Robert Bigelow bought the property. clear into the time that the Myers family owned the property. And for all we know, there could have been reports that even predate the Myers family taking possession of the property. So Thomas Winterton then says, quote, so having Kris Porritt here is huge. His experiences here on the ranch could help us gain even more information about unexplainable events that surround these mutilations, close quote. So, gentlemen, I want to just kind of briefly, we'll pause here and talk about that bit right there. So, again, guys, we're dealing with Kris Porritt, who was a Uintah County sheriff, right? So much like the role that Caleb Bench is currently serving in to this day, Caleb is also a Uintah County sheriff's deputy. Well, I think he works for Uintah and possibly Duchesne County. Case in point, though, like Caleb, Kris Porritt was a law enforcement officer. And one thing you got to understand, folks, those of you that have never lived in a ranching community, never lived in a farming community, these ranchers and farmers, and not just here in Utah, but anywhere, are a very proud people. These are people that rely on this form of living to feed their families, and in many cases to feed all of us as well. These are not men that are just going to sit around a campfire one night and say, you know what, I got me a real doozy. I'm going to start telling about this place and maybe we'll get famous by doing it. Folks, that is not the kind of people that we're dealing with here, with either Ken Myers or with Kris Porritt, and certainly not with any of the fine gentlemen that we have working on the ranch today. So, John and Seth, let's take a moment and think, how much weight, how much gravity would you say does a gentleman like Kris Porritt finally opening up about this particular situation? And we're not going to dive into the other big wow thing that he's going to mention here in just a moment. Just in regards to the cattle mutilation and the stuff that we've already talked about a little bit. What are your thoughts on Kris Porritt and what he's starting to tell us? And John, we'll start with you this time.
I thought it was really interesting. One of the reasons is because I can't remember who it was, but one of the Myers family members, I think it was a brother of Ken Myers. I don't remember for certain, so definitely do not quote me. But he said something to the fact that, nothing weird ever happened on the ranch while we were there. It's all BS. It's nonsense. The Shermans made it up. It was just a normal ranch. And that, based on what we know, that seemed unlikely, right? We've heard plenty of other stories from the times that they were there. So it actually does it lends some credence to what the sheriff said, in my opinion. You never really know, but there's lots of reasons someone could say that now. So, and I tend to be pretty skeptical, but it honestly kind of makes some sense. And I think he probably wouldn't want to put his reputation on the line. Like you said, given the types of people that are out there, these old school, law enforcement and old school ranchers and those sorts of people, they probably don't want to trash their reputations by making up stuff like that. So I give it some, I think that lends some weight to what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
Right on. Seth, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not skeptical usually. Because I want to believe most people. What I was curious was about, well, why now? When he said I made a promise never to tell, and I thought, okay, well, you've been able to hold on to it this long. Did you just, I don't think he's seeking fame or money. I don't think he would get it from an appearance on the show. Potentially the opposite, right? So I think it gives a lot of weight to it. And, and to kind of answer my own question of like, why now? When he said, like, my family convinced me, maybe they saw the show. I'm kind of putting myself in, this is my dad, and I see my dad holding on to this thing. And I know he knows stuff about the ranch but maybe he told me a little bit, not all. And there's this show, and I see it kind of being opened up, and light is shining on it. And I think the like very first time I got to talk to Caleb on Jeff's show, him and Thomas, I thanked them because I was like, thank you guys for shining a light on a part of our country geographically and culturally that's been so in the shadows with, oh, is it, what's going on? So I feel like if I was his family, I would encourage my dad too, be like, hey, you should share. It's, you held on to that long enough for healing. So I think that's possibly what is happening, what motivated him. That's my speculation, but yeah, I definitely give a lot of credence to what he says, and it certainly helps me entertain, if not fully believe, what he drops, on them, even after the cattle mutilation. And with cattle mutilations, we could talk about that all night because what a weird topic that just has no satisfactory answer. Is it vampires? I'm at that point now where I'm like, could it be vampires? It could, some form of vampires. Because when, people say, oh, it's cults or, oh, it's government entities, it's been happening forever. The precision, the no bones, the bones sometimes, the lack of blood. What the heck? I can't figure it out. If it's an alien experiment, wouldn't they have figured it out by now? Why do they got to keep mutilating the cows? It makes me think it is some sort of ritual thing, but I don't know what. But sorry, I just had to go a little bit into the mutilation part.
No, thank you for saying that. You said a word, Seth, that really hit me. You said that, you used the word healing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you really kind of hit it on the head right there, simply because anybody that has ever carried a secret, whatever kind of secret that may be, from a grandiose, secret, like, maybe you knew that, your mother or father cheated on the other and you've been holding it in this whole time, or maybe you stole something when you were in third grade and you got away with it, and it's been eating away at you all these years. I mean, honestly, any scenario you can imagine. Now put yourself in the shoes of Kris Porritt. Imagine what maintaining a secret for so long that you keep hidden from everybody, that you want to tell, you want to talk about it, but there's a stigma attached to it. A stigma in this case, like we're talking cattle mutilations, UFOs, the realm of the paranormal, which, for, let's be honest, the bulk of the people in the world, or at least in the United States, still look upon this with a great deal of, so, uh, and particularly coming from the older generation where that kind of thing just isn't talked about. It's not something you bring up at the dinner table. So for him to have made the pact with Ken Myers in the first place, 100% believable in my opinion. Why waiting so long to talk about it? I think you touched upon it, Seth, and I think that's exactly what it is that he's finally got, this show has been shining a light on this topic in such, forgive the horrible pun, a brilliant way. Because there is no other show out there, and we say this all the time, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, there's nothing else out there that comes close to it in regards to their credible and legitimate scientific method approach. They're going where the data leads them, and now, as we've seen particularly this season, that data is leading them to some of these previously we thought was, okay, that's the tinfoil hat, that's the ooh, but what if that where it's leading you? And in some cases, we've seen examples of that just this season, such as the dire wolf, right? Where again, it's still inconclusive. They don't know. They haven't stated, that's what we're dealing with as an animal that's been extinct for 10,000 or more years. It's just that this is where some of the data is leading us to consider some of these previously, you know, areas that we just, immediately tossed on the fringe side of it. Well, again, when you're trying to destigmatize stuff, and that's the whole reason, excuse me, that Roger and I even do this podcast, is to normalize and conventionalize this topic of letting people talk about stuff that we have customarily as a society kept in the shadows and kept, away from talking about freely. And so I think because of the growing and the evolution of shows like The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, people aren't as afraid to talk about it. And I think that's a good thing, because I think what we're going to start realizing is that those of us who are experiencers, and Seth, I know that you're one, I'm one, John, I think you had an
No,
experience of
nothing
some.
interesting ever
No,
happens to me.
well, aside from
I'm like
Being a
Bryant used to
Broncos
be.
fan,
Bryant's
that's
bragging. Like nothing ever happened. Well, until it happened, but
there you go.
I'm immune to it so far.
Well, it's going to happen to you, I
Unfortunately, I know
promise.
it's going to in some bizarre way someday.
Mm-hmm.
But
I just
but
real
eventually,
quick. Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
no, I was just going to wrap up by saying, but eventually, when you gain that courage, and I think we gain the courage of talking about our experiences once we've had them by hearing the experiences and accounts of other people that have had something equally extraordinarily, equally as unbelievable as what we may have had happen to us, also happen to them. And then you find out, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that has had some really weird shit happen to me. And that's only a good thing, because it allows people the opportunity to talk about it. And if it, they say that sunlight is the greatest disinfectant, right? And so, Seth, the way you said it a moment ago was just spot on, almost poetic for me, that it is, I think, a bit of healing for somebody like Kris to talk about this, if in fact it's something that has been weighing on him all this time. And now he feels, with the encouragement of his family, you're not doing a disservice to the memory of Ken by talking about this. And not only that, but it might actually be very relevant and might provide some helpful, at least in an anecdotal way, to the
Mm-hmm.
research that they're doing out at the ranch. And that's my thought on it. So, John, it's already.
That's what I was actually going to say. Like to Seth, I really appreciate the way you framed that, because I can be a little too skeptical sometimes. And when he brought these stories up, the cattle mutilation and the one to come next, there was a part of me that was like, "What? Why now?" But the way you framed it is perfectly reasonable. It's easy to imagine that exact scenario is what happened. Makes perfect sense. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's literally what happened. Like, Dad, we know you know this. The reason for keeping the secret doesn't even exist anymore. There's no reason not to get this out there. And here are people doing real work on the ranch, trying to figure this out, and you have information that can help them. Please tell them. That makes perfect sense. I love that. Even if that's not what happened, I'm going to pretend that's what happened now.
I think we figured it out.
Yep.
You got it, Seth. You figured it out for us. That was.
I think so. I think
It.
you nailed it. Yep.
Right on. So from there, guys, of course, this is where it then develops into the next aspect. And Thomas then asks Kris, quote, "Is there more to the story than we know?" Close quote. Okay, folks. So cue the bombshell, because it's about to drop. Kris then says, quote, "There was part of a wreckage." Close quote. Dragon says, "So when you say wreckage, you're talking about like some sort of craft wreckage?" To which Kris responds, "Yeah, some type of an aircraft or some kind of flying saucer or alien craft." Close quote. Guys, the look on Dragon's face at that point is one of complete astonishment and disbelief, like a real WTF kind of moment. And Dragon follows up Kris's answer by asking him, quote, "What has you feeling so sure that you feel like it was alien?" Close quote. And Kris then says, quote, "Well, one of the calves had been mutilated. Its head was laying down there," and he points to a spot on the ground in front of where Dragon and Thomas and the folks are standing. "And right behind it, there was a piece of metal that looked like aluminum, roughly 6 to 10 feet away from where he was pointing to where that mutilated cow's head was. And Kris says it was about 10 feet wide, close quote. Dragon then tells us, we've all heard so many stories about Skinwalker Ranch, but when Kris Porritt, a former deputy sheriff in the area, came back to the property again and told us his story about this alleged spacecraft crash, it was really shocking. It sounds fantastic, but if we're able to uncover something like that, then we're on to something really big here on the ranch, close quote. Kris continues. He says, Ken Myers picked that up, the piece of aluminum, kind of crumpled it and folded it, and he said, now watch. And he then threw it on the ground, and it just kind of slowly opened back up to a sheet of metal. In other words, it went back to its previous form. Tom Lewis then asks, quote, so this piece of metal, it was malleable and it popped right back, close quote. To which Kris says, yeah, oh yeah. Ken says, come on over here. There was an impression made right here, and he points to the ground. It was an indentation in the ground. I'm thinking it was close to 5 feet wide at the center and then tapered down to about a 2-foot point, and it was the same on the front as it was on the back. And it was just a little over 12 feet long, close quote. After being asked what Myers did with the metal and the wreckage, Kris says he has no idea what was done with it. Thomas Winterton says, quote, I was shocked when Kris said that Ken Myers had retrieved part of the wreckage, what appeared to be aluminum that could be crumpled up and then retake its shape. Now, that's probably one of the most spectacular claims that have been made here on the ranch. And I've learned never to discount anything, close quote. Thomas then asked Kris, was there other things there? To which Kris responds, well, I'll tell you. He found a liquid substance, but it wasn't liquid. It was more of a gelatin type stuff, jelly. It was green. It was pretty much scattered all over in here, close quote. Thomas then tells us, quote, if I had heard Kris Porritt say the things he did 5 years ago, I'd have laughed him right off this ranch. The interesting thing is, this is the same area that we saw a cow die, and we have the security footage that shows some type of black object up in the sky above the cow at the same time. You know, at this point, it's all speculation, but who knows what the truth is, close quote. Kris then says, quote, Ken Myers didn't want to make it public. He was afraid that the government would step in and take the ranch from him. I mean, it was his property and that's what he wanted. But I'm glad it's getting out, the truth about the ranch, close quote. So, gentlemen, a lot to unpack in that little segment right there where Kris is talking about it wasn't just simply a mutilated cow that Ken Myers had called him over to see. And I don't know about the two of you, but I've done a lot of reading about the famous Roswell incident that occurred in New Mexico in July of 1947. And one of the more well-known aspects of what is alleged to have taken place in Roswell in 1947 was Major Jesse Marcel, who was a military personnel that was working at Roswell Army Airfield at the time, had retrieved some of this wreckage of this unknown craft that had crashed out on this rancher's property. And some of the materials that this Major Jesse Marcel had retrieved had remarkable properties. And one of the things that he talks about is this piece of metal that, for want of a better term, looked like what we would call modern day aluminum foil that could not be burned, it could not be ripped or torn. And if you crumpled it up and put it, tried to smash it into a ball, the moment you took your hands off it and set it down, it just gradually reconstituted itself in its original form before it was crumpled up, like some kind of, what a lot of folks in science fiction now refer to as memory metal, or some kind of
Mm.
assumingly metamaterial, if you will, type of thing. So that's been, something that's been talked about regarding the Roswell incident ever since the late 1970s, when Stanton Friedman and I forget the other gentleman's name, brought the Roswell case back into the spotlight. And of course, it's been there ever since. So to hear Kris Porritt talk about this, and almost, at least in that aspect, so much striking similarity rather to what Jesse Marcel talked about all those years ago. That for me was a big moment. Now I don't know how much of the Roswell case history the two of you know of, but that for me was something that really stood out, and is immediately where my mind went was when he talked about this aluminum piece of aluminum that was crumpled up and folded, and yet when placed back on the ground, it just slowly went back to its previous shape. Uh, Stuff that, again, right out of the pages of fantasy or science fiction, but this is the first time that I'm aware of where we've heard of that having occurred on Skinwalker Ranch. And not just that, but that there's an eyewitness, not just Ken Myers, but Kris Porritt saw parts of this wreckage himself, and also saw this green jelly like substance that was scattered all around the ground. So, Seth, we're going to start with you. What were your thoughts on this little section right here?
Man, as soon as he started talking about the crash and the material, the memory metamaterial, you're right. I did think of the Roswell incident. As far as I know, that's the first time I've ever, or the earliest I've seen someone describe that sort of material. So I had that thought too, but I think I was more so fixated on the trying to figure out the connection with cattle mutilation and the crash, and why are cattle mutilations so prevalent around UFO sightings? And then I'm kind of wondering, like, with the fact that blood's always missing, do these crafts need blood to materialize in our dimension? If these are interdimensional beings, is that what's happening? I feel like I've kind of heard stuff like that, but I don't know enough about it. But maybe uh, they need blood, and what animal has a bunch of blood? A big cow, I don't know. A lot of organs are missing that have stem cells and regenerative stuff too. So I don't know, maybe there's something to help them create whatever physical form they need to materialize here. Maybe they're taking that from cows. Uh, and then I always wonder, like, maybe it's not a stable process. So maybe that's kind of why the craft crashed. Or was it a crash at all? Was it a gift of some sort? Because, I think ever since, I was in the insiders and reading more and more about this stuff, I learned about the gifting fields, where it seems like these metamaterials are given to us. Was it that? And the green jelly, of course, that was something that was a fun connection. We go, oh, okay. But then, given the explanation that we get from the examination of the green jelly, it makes me question why there was green jelly here. But we can get into that part later. But the crash itself, or the material, man, exciting. Because Skinwalker Ranch, this forces me to, like, actually accept the reality that these subjects are real. It's fun to speculate, but, like, this stuff's real. And if I'm trusting this guy, which I am going to, wow, like, what this, I think we said this episode does give us, like, a nice breather, but man, it really does give you, like, some crazy revelations of, what we're dealing with on this ranch, or what could even be under the Mesa, tying it into that again.
Absolutely. John, how about you?
What you just said, I like to say there's a very tangible difference between thinking something is real, believing something is real, and then viscerally knowing something is real. Like something happens to you when you make that transition. And I think a lot of us are doing that. We're kind of going from, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of neat. Wouldn't it be cool if all this were real? And then you start thinking maybe it was real. Then you think probably it was real. But when you get to that, oh crap, this is real. Like this is like for real, real. Something does. There's a switch that flips in your brain that just starts making you look at this stuff a little differently. But back to the materials, I was interested in. So when you mentioned the gel, I was interested, not just because of what we know is coming next, later in the episode, but I remember hearing other UFO crash reports, and I can't remember from where, but I would swear I heard that some of them were also associated. There was a gel-like substance found at these locations, but if I remember right, it was purple. And I can't remember if it was a gel, maybe it was a powder, but it was some other material that's like, what in the hell is that? And why is that here? And why do we keep finding it at these sorts of things? I can't remember the source for that, but so it may not be true or not, but that's what it made me think of. But thinking of why Myers would want to get rid of the material, I was thinking more about that. These are old school cowboys, right? I'm from the area. You guys know these sorts of guys. I mean, cowboys are a real thing, right? They're not just something you saw in westerns on TV. I mean, I've had some of my relatives are.
They're not John Travolta urban cowboys that just wear the big belt buckle and
right,
go ride
exactly.
Like electronic bull at some bar. These are real cowboys that make a living with their ranch. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And these guys, they've had this ranch for decades. And they probably, this weird stuff occasionally probably happens. This probably wasn't the first weird thing that happened. And we also know that these rural rancher types are not exactly the most trusting in the federal government, right? Mm-hmm. They're rather distrustful of the federal government. So it makes absolutely perfect sense that someone like Ken Myers would be just like, you know what? Mm-hmm. I don't want this getting out because this is my living. If the government's going to move in, they're going to, the Army's going to set up shop and take over or whoever, and they're going to kick us off our ranch. We're going to lose our this is how we make a living. This is our livelihood. We're going to lose that. And, I absolutely can understand why he would just say, you know what? I don't want to deal with all that. Just keep this under your hat. So it does make sense.
And that's what eminent domain. That's one of the fallouts of eminent domain is it can potentially cause a situation just like that, where you discover something truly extraordinary on your ranch and, the government decides they want to come and seize your property for the sake of national security.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck stopping them.
Or because some other reason they'll find a reason.
Yeah, they'll find a reason. There's no question. But yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you, John. And I've said it a number of times, 7 or 8 years ago, I was not at all one of these UFO UAP people. I was always of the mind that, yes, I do believe there's intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. Some of it may be more advanced than we are. Some of it may be at the same technological advancement level that we are, and some may be behind us. I mean, it just stands to reason, simply with the sheer number of stars and galaxies and solar systems. We're talking on an order of magnitude, these, exponentially how many likelihoods there are of there being civilizations that have advanced to the extent to where interstellar or even intergalactic travel is possible. So I'd always felt that, but as far as the real getting down to, the meat and potatoes of it, I thought Roswell was a really interesting and fascinating story, but again, there's been no hard data evidence, just anecdotal eyewitness testimony, which you should never completely toss out the window. But again, Roswell was so long ago, and all the people that were eyewitnesses or that were involved in any way, shape, or form have long since passed on. So assuming that those, conspiracy theories are true and that there really has been a cover up, and I do believe that there was a cover up. The government even in a sense, admitted that there was, because they admitted, oh, nothing to see here, when in fact they're claiming it was
Mhm.
this Project Mogul thing, which in and of itself is problematic, because the things that they're claiming tied into the Roswell case from Project Mogul didn't even happen until 3, 4, 5 years later, after the Roswell incident occurred. So there's a lot of holes in the government's official explanation. So I've
Imagine
always,
that.
right? Imagine that. Gee. So yeah, there's I've always felt that it's interesting, but it hasn't been until recently, again, say since about 2017, 2018, that my mind began to be a little more open to the idea of, well, maybe we should take a second look. And then again, that was the time that those three amazing videos were released by the Pentagon. And the Pentagon comes forward and says, yeah, these are genuine unidentified aerial phenomena, or unidentified flying objects. In other words, they don't have a classification for them. And to this day, they're still unexplained. They still don't know what they are. And then you add on to that the testimony of David Grush, Ryan Graves, David Fravor, taken under oath in front of Congress. So I'm now of the viewpoint that I don't know what any of these are. I don't know if any of this is in fact true, but I have to, again, go where the data is leading me to go. And a lot more people are starting to come forward, people that have really solid backgrounds. And again, Kris Porritt, I've never met him. I don't know what kind of a person he is, but presumably, and one thing I do have is I have enough faith in this show. I have enough faith in the end of the integrity of the team at Skinwalker Ranch, that if Kris Porritt was just talking, out of both sides of his mouth, they wouldn't allow it to be included in the show. Or at least they would have spoken up and said, whoa, wait a minute, that's not at all what went on here. And I have enough faith, and that's the best word I can use, that clearly Kris Porritt is somebody we should be listening to and paying attention to. Doesn't mean we have to believe him. We don't have to take everything he says at face value, but his story has a right to be heard, and we should pay attention to what he's telling us, as we should anybody that comes forward that has a story, or in Kris's case, an experience about that ranch. And that's what really floored me about this, was just the detail that Kris had. And you can tell by the way he's talking, the body language that he uses. This has not been easy for him to confront. This is something that he has been holding back for obvious reasons, in which we've already talked about. That whole generation that Kris came from just does not talk about this kind of thing. Here in our day and age, how many people just simply don't talk about this because they're afraid of how people are going to start painting them? Oh, there goes the kook, there, the UFO guy. Woo-hoo. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so there's, unfortunately, it's human nature. There's just going to be some modicum of a stigma that's always going to be attached to this. So I absolutely tip my hat to Kris Porritt for having the courage to come forward and talk about it, and not just to talk about it, but to talk about it on The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which gets how many million viewers all over the world. So his name and his story is now out there to be scrutinized and examined by so many people. And I, for one, again, I salute Kris. Only time will reveal whether or not what he said is, in fact, can be substantiated. But the mere fact that he's willing to come forward and talk about it, the man has my respect. The man, again, hats off to him. Any final thoughts on that before we move on to the next topic?
Nope.
Nope.
I think you said it.
Right on. And if I talk too much, just say, Jim, shut up.
Never.
Right on. So from there, Dragon and Thomas then meet with Travis and Eric at the command center, and they fill them in on Kris Porritt's story. Travis then says that even if 1%, just 1% of Kris's story ends up being verifiable, it would be fantastic. Travis then recommends they investigate where the crash is alleged to have taken place, and the team, of course, agrees. Thomas then points out to Eric an incident that occurred during one of the team's first times on the ranch back in 2016, when Eric said to Thomas, "Hey, isn't that interesting? There's that big hole in the tree down there in the south." Close quote. And folks, if you heard the doorbell, that was the guy delivering tacos.
Of
So,
course.
of course, Jim and his tacos, right? So Thomas then points out to Eric an incident that occurred during one of the team's first times on the ranch back in 2016, right? And Thomas then shows them the photo taken of that time. And sure enough, it looks like a symmetrical circle through the canopy of the tree where they had just been with Kris Porritt. Eric says, "It looks unnatural, doesn't it?" And Travis says, "Eric and Thomas were right. There is a perfectly circular hole through the canopy of the tree where Kris Porritt claims that a spacecraft crashed on Skinwalker Ranch more than 3 decades ago." And Travis says, "I wasn't sure what to think, but I was definitely intrigued." The team then decides to take a closer look at the tree and the ground surrounding it. Travis suggests having an arborist come in to look at it and help determine if, in fact, something hit it and made that circular hole in the canopy. And Eric, of course, wants to surmise if there's any kind of heat or radiation damage that can be detected from the tree that experienced such an event. So the next day, the team welcomes arborist John Kammerer from a firm called Arbor Plus out to the ranch to investigate the tree. John describes himself by saying, quote, "I'm a certified arborist and I have 15 years experience managing and assessing the health of trees. I'm going to climb up into the tree and look for signs of if something went through it," close quote. Dragon then says, "This hole looks like it's perfectly cut out. So we want to know if this hole was created by something abnormal or if it's just a normal occurrence in nature. So having an arborist out here to see if there's any broken branches or burns on the bark, that's going to help us a lot." So once John gets up to the hole section in the tree's canopy, Thomas asks him if he sees anything. John says, yes, there appears to be something that could have broken off there at some point, causing the tree to grow and bend the way it has. When asked if he can determine how long ago that may have happened, John says the branch was broken roughly 30 years ago or longer. This closely aligns with what Kris told them. Now, while John is up in the tree, Travis asks him to estimate the geometry of the hole. John tells them that it's about 10 feet 8 inches and is pretty symmetric, which, of course, gentlemen, seems to match Kris's description, right? So Travis then mentions that with John's findings, while not conclusive by any means, has them rethinking their skepticism of Kris's story. So let's discuss that real quick. And John, we'll start with you. What now that they've actually brought an arborist, a tree expert, out to the ranch to kind of do an assessment to see if, just at a very basic foundational level, if there's any possible merit to the story that Kris just told them about some kind of craft seemingly crashing through that tree. And from a distance, that tree does in fact have what appears to be a perfectly circular hole in its canopy. What how does that all play out for you, that little segment there?
Yeah, I don't know that it was all that interesting, to be honest. That was my take. I thought they did the right thing by investigating it, because clearly the hole does look really strange. And if it's the same tree, you got to get somebody out there to investigate and take a look and see what they see. That's obviously true. But I don't know. When we're talking about these timelines and you're talking about a live tree, sometimes I'm not an arborist, I'm not a tree expert, but 30 years of growth, that tree, I'm pretty sure looked quite different 30 years ago or more, when this happened. So I don't know. It just didn't feel that significant, but who knows? That's just my take on it. I really don't know. It's intriguing. And when you see the hole in the photo with the helicopter, in the foreground and the hole, that it does look pretty darn weird. And you don't see that very often. So there's maybe something to it.
Right.
But I'm not quite sure what to say about it. It
Seth,
seemed to be a little bit, maybe not too.
Seth, how about you? What's your take? I think you're on mute, buddy.
Sorry about that. I had to cough and drink some coffee earlier and muted it. But so yeah, I kind of at first was like, I felt like I agree with John. Like they're doing the right thing. Let's get an arborist. Let's look at it. Rather, it's one thing to be like, yeah, it's a hole, interesting, wow. But like, no, let's follow this thread so we can either check it off the list or continue to research it. So was it all that interesting? I totally see where John's going or comes from on that because I too had that feeling. Yeah, to me, I think the value was like it just kind of gave a little bit more credence. So the story we got the fact that he's law enforcement that holds a lot of weight. Um, we got the hole in the tree roughly lining up with the timeline. Pretty, you can't totally disregard it. And then you got the green jelly. So there's three things kind of potentially verifying this really fantastic story, if even 1% is true. Um, it is a really big tree, though. Like when he first shot whatever they shoot to get his line up into the tree to climb it, the base of that tree was huge. I'm not sure exactly what kind of tree it was. It didn't look like our big oak trees we have here in Texas, but uh, you know you make a really good point, John, about the 30 years was a long time ago, and what is 30 years of growth would be a lot on a tree, but I'm not an arborist either, but maybe not on a tree that's this old and that big already.
Right.
Um,
Right. Maybe it was
that and
big
I
already. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, and I just throw that in there just because I did have that moment of, dang, that's a big tree. Look at him climbing up in there. The base of it was pretty thick, but it furthers along the story for sure, and kind of gave us, like we said at the beginning, gave us what the pacing that kind of I think we could all take a breath and kind of slow down on this episode.
You make a great point. I don't want to retract what I said, but my frame of reference was my hometown is not too far from there. And
Okay.
when I moved away in 1991, there was a section of our property that had no trees. And if you go there now, it's got some big trees on it, so you're talking 30 plus years of growth, and they're really big. And that was my frame of reference. I'm like, yeah, 30 years is a lot of growth. But to your point, this might be a still living, very much older tree that was already big. And I think that does change, the way we look at it. So that's a great point.
Yeah, for all we know, that particular tree, and I don't know if that's a cottonwood or a black or a Russian olive tree. Maybe Caleb or somebody can clarify that for us at some point. But it's very conceivable if that tree, could be 50, 60, 70 years old,
Yep.
which if that's the case, then at the time this would have happened 30 years ago, it could have conceivably been 30 years old at the time that this event is alleged to have taken place. So for me, uh, like you guys, this wasn't necessarily the sleek and exciting aspect of the show, but what this did, it laid the groundwork to kind of at least verify, is this part of Kris's story the very foundational level? Is it possible? Does there appear that this could have happened, that something could have crashed through this tree? And if so, how does that seemingly unnatural hole in the canopy, does that match with the description of roughly the size of the craft that Kris described? And then is there any other telltale signs? And this is what we didn't get background information on, because Eric specifically said he wanted to get readings on whether there was any obvious signs of heat or radiation damage to the tree, which presumably an interstellar craft or even an interdimensional craft might contain telltale signs of some kind of radiation or other electromagnetic energy that may have, have a lasting impact, no pun intended, on the tree. So the fact that this was, I think, kind of all right, is there merit to us researching and looking into Kris's story further? And based off of what John, the arborist, was able to tell them, I think the answer to that is yes. So maybe they're going to revisit it at some point and actually maybe take a metal detector or something out to the tree and see, okay, are we getting a reading? Is there any indication that the ground has been disturbed? That kind of thing. So I agree. It probably wasn't the sexiest part of the show, but I think it's still perhaps down the road will be something that is relevant to what we might see coming down in a later episode, either this season or perhaps in a future season. Just
Yeah, and you know what it really shows? Honestly, it shows that they're following the data.
it does.
A witness gave them a report that happened in this location. They matched that up with this photo that has the tree, it has the hole in it. And they're like, well, we should be diligent and check this out. Whether or not anything comes of it, they're following the data. Like, this is a data point that we can check out. Let's go check it out. And they did. And they got their data. So I think that's, whether I thought it was that interesting or not, it still points to it's the science behind the show. They're following the data where it leads. And I think that's great.
Well, and didn't Thomas also mention that this spot was where that one cow passed away that we saw during the first season when they brought Linda Moulton Howe onto the ranch to investigate it, and they caught in like that one or two frames of the camera footage of that black object that was up above the tree right around the time that the cow collapsed. So again, one more bit of data that may be relevant and maybe it's not. But
Right.
again, like you
Gotta
said,
follow
John,
up. You got to check it.
exactly. It's data nonetheless.
Yep.
So attention then returns back to the Mesa and the drilling operation, and drilling issues persist with both the beacon and the drill itself, almost as if something is blocking the beacon signal and preventing the drill from going further. Dragon checks the spoils from the drilling rig for any possible metallic chunks or flakes, and instead finds something truly astounding: a gelatinous green glob of goo, right? This gel, as the title of the episode refers to. At first, Dragon thought it might be a rock, but then he felt it squish under his fingers. Eric advises him not to touch it further until they know what it might be. Pretty smart advice. Eric immediately mentions that it recalls Kris Porritt's story of Ken Myers having discovered green jelly all over the area where the alleged spacecraft was. Travis says, quote, "That is the last thing in the world I'd be thinking about right now, green jelly," close quote. Dragon then finds another piece of gelatinous material, only this one is pink instead of green. Travis then mentions that finding the green jelly was strange enough, but now finding a pink specimen so soon after now has him wondering if what they're looking for, or if what they're looking at, is organic or biological. He says, quote, "I would never expect to find stuff like that in solid rock," close quote. Travis looks further in the spoils pit and finds a piece of wood in the spoils. So they then package this green and pink gelatinous goo and the wood up and ship it off to the University of Utah to have it analyzed. So back to the drilling, the beacon stops working altogether and necessitates an end to the drilling for that day. Thomas, by this point, is completely at his wits' end and regarding what to do next, as everything seemingly they've tried thus far in finishing the boreholes has failed. They have no idea where in the hole they are. where in the hole they are, not where in the hell they are.
Sorry. I was
So,
trying to hold it in. Seth lost it first.
Yeah.
okay, we saw you, Seth. So they decide to stop drilling for the day and kind of regroup. And Alex from Mark Construction tells them that they have roughly another 260 more feet to go, but it's only an estimate as they don't know for sure where in the hole they are. They're essentially operating blind. So the 2 days later, the team meets at the command center to hear about the analysis of the goo and the wood samples. And the analysis was conducted by Dr. Mitchell Power, the curator of botany at the Natural History Museum of Utah, located in Salt Lake City. Dr. Power, and again, no, his first name is not Austin. Thank you, folks. I'll be here all week. Try the veal. Dr. Power put the samples under microscopes and did some high resolution imagery. First up is the piece of wood, or what they thought was wood, but not so fast. Upon microscopic examination, it turns out that it doesn't appear to be wood at all, but rather appears to be an aquatic plant of some kind with all kinds of pore spaces inside of it. Both Travis and Dr. Power are perplexed as to why something like this would be so deep inside the solid rock mesa. The doctor says it's likely from an ancient wetland, but nobody knows how it could have gotten inside solid sandstone, right? So the jelly sample is up next, and he did what he called a smear sample of this jelly. He said it didn't seem to fit the local geography of Skinwalker Ranch. At first, the doctor thought it might be algal in nature, or algae, right? However, Dr. Power did not see any algal structures when he looked at it microscopically. So the green of the gel is not a biologically driven color. In other words, it does not contain chlorophyll. After the
More
organic,
like borophyll.
what's that?
I said more like borophyll. Sorry, I had to.
Oh man, Seth is on one
Adam
tonight.
Sandler fan here. Doom, doom.
Oh gosh, now I got to go watch that movie after we're done. However, Dr. Power again, he didn't see any of those structures there. So after the organic slime layer was removed, the particles left are basically pieces of burnt plant material. In fact, he said it contained, quote, an abundance of burnt plant material, close quote. In other words, guys, it's full of charcoal. Travis asked, "You mean like something caused a fire deep inside the mesa?" Close quote. The doctor then says, "Absolutely, yes." Dr. Power, it turns out, studies ancient wildfires and he looks for exactly what these samples show. And when asked what might account for these items being buried so deep in the mesa, the only thing Dr. Power could come up with is some buried wetland feature. Did those items form naturally over thousands of years or more? Or did a fire of some kind by, for instance, a crashed spacecraft, burn the wetland area and cause these unique things to form? We'll wrap up with a quote from Caleb. He says, quote, "If this is some ancient wetlands, how do we account for pulling out a bunch of metal that's even deeper than what this sample was?" Close quote. And we'll essentially wrap it up there, guys, because what transpires from there on out is just further kind of ruminating on what has transpired in this episode by the team. So again, they go in. Dragon checks out the spoils of the drilling, and in the spoils pit, he finds these two samples of a gelatinous substance. I've joked in the past, oh, look, it's Stephen Greenstreet's diaphragm in the Mesa. But all joking aside, what could this possibly be? And again, it adds another layer of absolute mystery to what is inside the mesa. Is this perhaps supposed to be some kind of organic protection layer around the drill bit? Is it like a shock absorber of some kind that protects whatever is inside the mesa? Or is it, again, something that is indicative of maybe at some point in ancient days, that area was a marshy wetland and a spacecraft crashed and ignited it and set it on fire? But again, if that's what happened, A, what Kris Porritt and Ken Myers experienced was back in the 1980s. Now, that might be ancient for some people, right? But we're talking about stuff that presumably would have been tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago in the region if there was a marshy wetland. Now, there's also Lake Bonneville, which was apparently like this humongous prehistoric lake that essentially covered the entire state of Utah, like this massive, almost like an inland ocean kind of type body of water that has long since evaporated and receded. And so was it something like that? We just don't know. But the fact that it was found as part of the drilling into the mesa, again, that just opens up a whole new line of questioning that came out of nowhere, quite literally. Seth, your thoughts on this green jelly?
Well, I my favorite part of the show was Dragon picking it up, showing Eric. Eric going, Dragon, I don't think I would be holding that until we can figure out exactly what it is. And Dragon kind of going, oh, well, I picked it up.
Too
And Eric's
late.
like, yeah, you did, buddy. So that had me laughing out loud because that's me. I would have totally been like, what in the world is this? And picked it up and then
Mhm.
slowly had the realization after someone smarter than not. I mean, I don't think Dragon would be offended by saying Eric is smarter than us, but having an Eric type coming over and going, Seth, I don't think you should hold that. I would be like, oh boy. But he didn't seem to be phased by it. So, he's braver than I am because he kept playing with it, picked up the green jelly and pink jelly. So other than, really like laughing out loud at that, I'm confused because like you said, the timelines, if this is an ancient wetland that they drilled into, I don't get it. I have a weird feeling that it's somehow connected to um, the lake that does exist. That's just on the other side of the mesa, or not just on the other side, but it is, in proximity. I think last season they had one of the local Native Americans talk about his sighting. I think it was the radio host. He was at the lake and he was looking towards the mesa and he saw a UFO. He took a picture of it right above that lake. So it, is it somehow connected to that? I don't know. I kind of have a feeling maybe it could be because again, water features always seem to somehow attract these things, underground water features especially. I'm not smart enough to understand any of this, I guess, is my takeaway because I'm just going, what?
Welcome to the
What?
club.
Like, yeah. So, I don't know. It's befuddling. It's if it is an ancient seabed or waterbed, whatever, why did the sheriff and Mr. Myers see it at their crash site that it landed in a field? So is this a time anomaly? Like time doesn't work the same, so maybe you're gonna get, I don't know, layover of these ancient features somehow melting into modern times whenever a craft like this does. Because if these crafts or things, UFOs, UAPs, if they, time operates differently, maybe in their sphere, their energy sphere, they'll pull in organic material from an ancient seabed that used to be there where it just crashed in our present time, but it also exists in that time. Because what is time? I don't know,
Right.
and all kind of in there, it's what
Seth,
is going on?
Seth, my head is completely spinning now. Thank you. That was awesome. John, how about you?
I love that idea because Jim knows that my favorite hypothesis is that a craft crashed into Lake Bonneville. But what if this is after Lake Bonneville had, the waters had receded and now it was a wetlands area, but the ground was still soft, because I think something crashed in there and then over millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years, I can't remember how long ago Lake Bonneville was there, but the land, the rocks hardened.
I'd ask my dad because he was a teenager around that time, but my dad's not with us anymore. So, yeah.
It's been a while, yeah. But, so my idea is that there's something that crashed a very long time ago and the rocks have hardened around it. And now it's just stuck in this mesa, but it's been there for a very, very long time. And that's interesting if that were true. But I love, 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 love Seth's idea because imagine what if the craft is in the mesa, and we've often kind of hypothesized this, the engine's still running, right? And that's what causes a lot of the weird stuff around it. It's just something about it's operating, and it's still got fuel, however it operates, and it's still running. What if what Seth just said is true? They seem to distort time as well as space. I was going to say, let me back up. I was going to say, what if it crashed and created a pocket and somehow the gel is really very, very, very old? Well, my first question is, how is it still hydrated? Is it getting water from the lake or what? But if it's inside a sealed pocket of rock and they drilled into it, I don't know why it's still hydrated given this length of time. But
Excellent point.
what if what Seth said has some truth to it? And the closer you get to this thing, the more time is warped. So less time has passed for what is close to the craft than what has passed outside of the mesa. So maybe that stuff isn't all that old. In close to the craft, it's not very old. That's why it's still hydrated, because it's much younger, because less time has passed, because the craft is warping time.
Man, you made me just think too of like, what if as it crashed and broke up, debris is crashing at different times? The debris
Yeah.
field, the debris field isn't hitting all at the same time. Maybe somehow because each piece as it breaks off is warping on its own time. Like maybe that little piece that the sheriff found, that was from an ancient crash, but somehow that piece flew off and then landed on their timeline or their time.
That wouldn't be the first time I've heard that, because speaking of
Ah,
Roswell, there was a crash like what, 20 years later or so, and some source said this is actually this craft was part of the same group as the one that crashed in Roswell, and time did diverge. And
oh,
in their time, they were crashing at the same time, but in our timeline, it was like 20 years apart. So what if holy crap, what a great idea. I love that.
Wow.
That's food for thought.
Yeah,
yeah.
in a big way. Well,
Because
let's.
I was thinking there's no way these two green gels could be the same. They're in no way related, but that would relate them in a really unexpected way.
Well, and to be fair, in the interest of I don't even know the word I'm looking for right now. Forgive me, folks. My limited Raider brain is already jelly, no pun intended. But um, we don't know for sure if what Ken Myers and Kris Porritt saw all those years ago is in fact the same substance that Dragon found in the spoils pit. So it may be something completely different. We don't know. But the fact that the timing of it, again, no pun intended here, the timing of Kris telling that story and then a day or so later, them uncovering this very specific type of thing that seems to fit the description of being green in color and being gelatinous in its form seems to be a little too much of a coincidence to be anything else. But let's also bear in mind, and again, folks, I don't know what each of you feel about Bob Lazar, and for me, the jury is still out on a lot of things that he's talked about. But one of the things that he mentioned about the UFO that he allegedly worked on at S4 at Area 51 back in the 80s was obtained by means of an archaeological dig. And so that would imply that one of these craft is very, very old if it was found at an archaeological dig. We don't know where, we don't know in what condition. All that we know is that on Joe Rogan's podcast a couple years ago, when he was on with either Corbell or George Knapp, I don't remember which one, but he mentioned, he's like, yeah, they got the craft that I worked on. They discovered it in an archaeological dig somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So there appears to be, if Bob Lazar is telling the truth, and there seems to be mounting evidence, circumstantial, anecdotal evidence that some of these craft are, in fact, very ancient. Uh, it's certainly within the realm of possibility that these things crashed a long time ago. And then again, not wanting to play into the more left field stories on the ranch, but this creature that has derisively been referred to as the Dino Weaver, right? They're out by Homestead 2, where this seemingly prehistoric creature momentarily appears, scampers by the people that witnessed it, and then just as quickly as it appears, it disappears. So was it an optical illusion? Was it a hallucination? Or was it one of these time anomaly things, one of these extratemporal events that seemingly seem to take place at the ranch where however many thousands or millions of years ago, this prehistoric creature was just minding its business, walking along, doing whatever it's doing. And unbeknownst to it, it just walks into this portal, this wormhole, this whatever it is that bleeds into our timeline, however many millions or hundreds of thousands of years in its future, if you're looking at it in a linear sense. And then just as quickly as it comes into our time, it skips through another portal and goes back to its time or some other point in time. So again, it opens up all of these possibilities. And the way you described it, Seth, and then you as well, John, I mean, wow, this just shows how deep this rabbit hole may truly go. And again, we're just simply speculating and spitballing here. But oh my gosh, what if that is one of the potential directions that this leads us, is that these things may exist out of time, extra temporal, right?
Speculation is fun.
Oh
I want to
yeah.
put something in there real fast. Have you guys seen Interstellar?
Yes.
I just watched it recently. My wife and I just rewatched it because we were talking about it. And we were like, we got to watch it. So I'm like, it's
Same.
fresh. I just saw it.
Okay, so the first planet they land on, the water planet,
Right.
right? Because they're in the gravity, the strong gravity of Gargantua, the black hole. Time runs slower on the planet relative to the people that are coming to the planet. So they land on the planet and they say the lady that had been there, from their perspective, had been there for a very long time. They're like, she probably just crashed an hour ago. So
yeah,
what if the same type of thing is happening here? This goes back to, what if the closer you get to this thing, the slower time goes? If that explains why that stuff is still hydrated, because it's actually much younger. What if that means when you get to the craft, from the craft's perspective, it just crashed? Like maybe it thinks from its perspective, it's still pretty young. That would be pretty wild, because you could get in there and not find something that's ancient looking to us. It could look really new because it is new from its timeline.
Right.
That would be maybe cool. I love that idea. And like you said, this is fun. It gets your brain racing. And because you saying that makes me think another thing. And because, I wonder, is it calling to us because it recognizes us as the closest thing to what its captain pilots usually are? Are we descendants of whatever crashed it? I don't know. It's so many questions. This is so fun. Thank you, Jim, for including me in tonight's discussion.
This is why I wanted both of you to come on tonight, because I knew that you guys are like me in the sense that you think outside the box and you take everything into account, and for me, when I listen to stuff like this, and when I do a lot of reading, and I'm like a sponge, I just absorb it all, and it just stays in here. And when you guys talk about this kind of thing, it's absolutely the kind of stuff that really fascinates and excites me to think about the possibilities. And I can't even imagine how exciting and frustrating and just inspiring a lot of this has to be to people like Eric and Travis and the team out there at the ranch when they encounter stuff like this. And we know that there's got to be some kind of time anomaly out there because they've detected one already with the uh,
Mm-hmm.
the the equipment that Pete Kelsey has brought out, right? The GPS and the lidar. There's like a quarter of a second time difference, and how do they account for that unless something is in fact spoofing the sensor equipment, which you have to hold as still in the realm of possibility, but not likely. So it's all of this stuff which makes the whole greater sum of Skinwalker Ranch such a compelling and fascinating rabbit hole to go down. And we've just gone down that much of it so far. And it's, who knows how deep this rabbit hole goes, but I am so glad that I had a chance to go down a little bit of it with each of you guys, and of course all of our amazing viewers and subscribers here for the Soul of the Unexplained. And man, what a conversation, guys! Bravo.
It was good, but it's fun. It's easy for us to speculate. We're not scientists. We can think outside of
Mm-hmm.
the box because we have no idea if what we're saying is
Right.
ridiculous. Right?
Yeah.
For all we know, Eric, if you ever watches this, will go, man, what a bunch of morons.
Yeah. Like,
What in the crap?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, so just closing thoughts and remarks. Seth, we'll start with you.
Oh man, just continues to be a really exciting season, inspiring a lot of fun conversations, and thoughts. Yeah, I look forward to it. This was fun. I didn't, you know, watching it the first time felt like, okay, a little bit of a slow episode, but talking it out with you guys, I'm excited to see where this leads. I think they're setting us up for um, just a real spectacular ending to the season. So I'm pumped. Let's go Skinwalker Ranch.
Right on. John, how about you, buddy?
I was good. I think I've said this 2 or 3 times already, but I was about to say the same thing. Like, I almost need to reevaluate this episode after our discussion. You know, I kind of am looking at parts of it a little differently than I did the first time I watched it. So yeah, it I think you're right. They are setting us up for something. This seemed like an episode full of setup for what's coming down
Mm.
the road. So it's a little bit of a breather, maybe, but I think that's before they come in with a knockout punch, maybe.
Calm before the storm, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think. Well, we already know. Travis has said that the next two episodes in particular, I think episode 12 was one that he mentioned is really going to be one where you're going to be dropping your socks and your jaw are going to be hitting the floor simultaneously, kind of thing. So we know that it definitely is building up to something. And this episode to me now, I maybe it's because I'm such a Skinwalker Ranch fanboy, but every episode this season has really, for me, moved the entire thing forward. It's the momentum of this season in particular has been so much more focused, and the pace of discovery seems to have really picked up, especially now that they have better technology, now that they have Jim Royston and Sam DeRiso of Omnitech out there to assist them with some of the technological aspects. The subject matter experts that they continue to bring out to the ranch, like Pete Kelsey, the folks from Lunasond. I would love to see them this season. I'd love to see them come out. We know that it looks like Sky Elements are coming back this next episode to run another drone experiment. So I enjoyed this episode. Was it as jaw dropping and reality breaking as the Cone Zone? I don't know if anything ever will be. Even though Travis says they're, and Caleb last week even said, well, hold on, guys, stay tuned. You might have that moment again. So I thoroughly enjoyed this episode. I think what I enjoyed the most was listening to Kris Porritt's testimony of his experience with Ken Myers out at the ranch. And then seeing what appeared to be validation of at least the foundational elements of his of the story that he told, to the extent that there does seem to be justifiable reason for looking into it a little bit further, and how they go about doing that. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But I genuinely enjoyed this episode. Uh, I loved going down that rabbit hole, and the conversation we just had about time, Seth and John, holy crap. Um, we could probably just riff on that for another hour at least on the possibilities involved with some of that stuff. So hats off to both of you gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for joining me on the night before the 4th of July. I'm expecting the fireworks and artillery to go off in my neighborhood any minute now.
It's already going off here. I was wondering if you could hear it. Mortars and all sorts of illegal, very large fireworks right behind me.
There you go. So again, we send our best wishes to Roger Stokes, and we're thinking of him and praying for him, and hope that he recovers quickly. We miss you, Roger, and can't wait to get you back on the saddle with us. And again, Seth, thank you so much, and John, thank you. It's been awesome to have you guys here. And folks, if you like what you saw in this particular episode, then please hit that subscribe button down there somewhere, and hit the like button too, because we like likes. We like to know that people like the content that we're putting out there. So share with us, if you would like to, folks, your thoughts on what we discussed in this episode in the comments section below, or hit us up on Facebook. You can find us at the Soul of the Unexplained on Facebook as well. And so with that, Seth and John, I wish you and your families both a very safe and happy Independence Day coming up in just a few hours. It's when the clock strikes. And to all of our viewers out there, particularly those of you here in the United States, obviously in the United States, where Independence Day is really the big thing. So wouldn't expect to wish a happy Independence Day to any of our British subscribers. That would be kind of cheeky, right? So to all of my fellow Americans, happy 4th of July. Be safe. And Roger and I, and who knows, perhaps Seth and John, will see you next time here on The Soul of the Unexplained. See ya.